Okay. Hey, welcome to 10-Minute Author Tidbits. Today we have the marvelous, you can't even see my face, Sally Britton with us. And we are going to, oh, I dropped my paper. That's all my questions. We're going to talk a little bit about, we were just discussing this. They're called American Victorian romances. I had to look it up on Amazon because I always call them your Westerns, but that's not completely what they are. So they're kind of Victorian Westerns, right?
Right. I call them my Westerns too. The Victorian, that whole an American Victorian romance thing, that is very much a marketing spin.
To get it in categories.
Exactly. To make sure that Amazon knows that it's not just a Western and it's not just a Victorian romance. And that readers know too. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so explain for those who don't know exactly what it is then. If we're calling it a Victorian Western, what do you define that as?
I've got a couple of different, thoughts on that, but the idea is when we think about the Victorian age, we think about, British people, and we think about what was going on in England and the fashions and the manners and the sophistication. And then a lot of the times when we think about Westerns, we're thinking grittier, the cowboys, the dust, the dirt, the Wild West. So in the Victorian genre and era, there's already an established civilization and everybody already knows all the rules. Whereas in Westerns, you have people who are still trying to tame the West. They're still coming up with the rules. In the Victorian era in England, you wouldn't expect to see people walking around in long coats wearing guns down the city streets. And they had great public transportation and all that kind of thing. Whereas in the Wild West, everybody had a gun on their hip and everybody rode into town on a mule or a horse. And so it's just both genres have completely different feelings. So I went with an American Victorian romance because I'm steering a little bit away from the gritty. Mm-hmm. And at least one half of my romantic couple is always a Victorian Briton.
Okay.
Yeah. So they come into the West and they kind of sort of bring that sophistication and the manners and all the Victorian ideals with them.
Now, does that make it easier or harder to have them have their own voice?
It's been the Victorians, my Victorians.
Well, because if you got an American and a Victorian, I mean, they're totally different. So it's not, I mean, does it make it easier to keep their voices separate because you're writing from such different perspectives for them? Or is it actually?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, because it's so different. In my very first book, I have a rancher's daughter. So someone who's grown up, eking a living off the land, with a Marquess's son. Mm. So he's, used to being catered to and everything, being for his entertainment and his benefit. So they're from two very different places on this ranch together.
Right. So do you find that you start upscaling your American's voice a little bit and maybe down? That would be me. I'd be like, all of a sudden my American would be like, I shall not do that. And normally that wouldn't be how they would sound. So, or is it pretty easy?
Well, it depends on the characters themselves and on the story I'm telling. But for the most part, I let them stay who they are. They just gain new experiences. I grew up in Texas, and the ranch that I've based all of this on, the ranch that I created, I made the family originally from Texas. So that helps a lot. Yeah. Is I think about, how my grandmother sounds, how my mom sounds, how my uncles sound. So that helps me keep their voices right in terms of, just their attitudes and the way they say things, the phrases they use, things like that.
Especially your grandmother, because she would be a lot closer to that time period too.
Oh, yes, and she was a farm girl. My grandma was born in the 1940s, and she was a farm girl, and she knew her grandmother pretty well, who was one of the last wagon trains that went into Texas that was attacked by an, Native American tribe as they were
Mhm.
coming in. So it's like it's back there in our family history, but in terms of, like, the oral stories and
Mhm.
traditions that we've gotten, it's still pretty fresh. So,
That's cool.
yeah.
Okay, so that was one of my questions is it because I know you lived in Arizona too. Because
Oh, yeah.
these take place in Arizona, right? These are all
All of them, yeah. Mhm.
okay. So I was wondering if there was a specific place in Arizona, but it sounds like you actually took it from Texas as opposed to Arizona,
I took the people from Texas, but,
but the place from
um,
Arizona.
there's a ranch that is still in operation today. It's called the Empire Foundation Ranch, and it was originally started by, 2 Canadians and an Englishman in the
Oh, there.
1870s. Yeah, it's awesome, and I actually they have this fantastic website, and they've published letters that the Englishman wrote home to his family, and I've got a collection of them in a book, and it's called An Englishman's Arizona, and so it's all of his, like, shock and awe and, all of his feelings about dropping from beautiful, green, vibrant England into the middle of a desert.
Yeah.
Mm,
And
that
a
that was
crazy
a huge
wild desert.
resource.
Yeah, I
Yes.
bet. Is it is it one you had to buy or is it public domain now? Could you Google it?
Most of the letters, like I said, on the website.
That's cool.
It hasn't been scanned and saved anywhere,
Uh,
like, it's not on archive.org or
yeah.
Google Scholar. But I found a really old copy on eBay and spent a lot of money to get it. So, it's a precious resource for
How did
me.
you even find that book? I mean,
Well, when I originally had the idea for this series, I was actually still living in Arizona. So I didn't publish the first book until we had moved. But the idea has been with me for 5 years or so. So I
oh,
started
wow.
doing research there locally. Like I went and
Mm,
visited the ranch. I went to local libraries and checked out all the resources they had on trains and cattle and newspaper articles and all of that. I mean, it was some old-fashioned research sleuthing, and one library had that book. And so I had a notebook that had, all of the things. I'm like, "Okay, make sure you come back and look at this when it's actually time to write." But we had moved, and so I had, like, circled and underlined, and I remembered this resource just being so cool because I read through the whole book, like, every single page, just interested in it. So it's like, "I have to find this." The closest library that has it is, like, a university library in Illinois. I was like, "I can't go all the way there to do my research." So I started looking online. I put up like an alert on eBay, and when it popped up, I bought it. So I got really
that's so
lucky.
cool.
Yep.
Which it probably helped that you had been to the actual ranch. That probably gave you a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
background information too.
Oh, yeah, I have tons of
Yeah.
photos that I took of what it looks like, but it's really cool. A lot of people have actually seen bits and pieces of that ranch without knowing it because several Hollywood Western films were filmed there.
Oh,
It's like lots of them, lots of old John Wayne movies. Oklahoma, the musical, was actually filmed in Arizona, right where I was living at the
oh,
time.
cool.
So, yeah, so it's like a lot of us have seen that area without knowing that's what we were
Without
seeing.
realizing. Yeah. Okay, I think we've only got time for one more question. That 10 minutes goes
Oh,
fast. So my biggest thing is how on earth did you ever come up with this idea? Like people ask us that all the time. Where do you come up with your ideas? And this is one that even I go, wow, where did you even come up with this?
when I started writing books, I knew I wanted to write a Western. And it was because, and they had both already passed, but it was because both of my grandfathers were such huge, huge Western fans. Like they had
Mm,
all the Louis L'Amour books, Zane Grey. If I was visiting and they were in charge of the remote, there was a John Wayne movie on the screen. Or even though it's not technically Western, I watched the oh, goodness, now it's escaped me. Man from Snowy River with
oh, mhm.
with one of my grandfathers over and over. He bought me the soundtrack as a gift when I got my, I started driving and stuff. So both of my grandfathers just really, really loved the West. And that was something that I shared with them. And so when I started writing books and having all my different ideas, it's like, I want to write a Western. I want to write a Western because I have this history with them. And I want my grandpas, even though, they're not here with me anymore, to be proud of what I'm doing. So that's where the idea to write a Western came from. But of course, I established myself as a Regency author fairly early on. And I know the world of England, the 19th century England, better than I could ever know the West, it feels like. Even though I live as an American, it's like Regency is my second language. So it was a conglomeration of those two things. It's like, okay, readers know me as the person who writes, dukes and lords and ladies, but I want to write this Western thing. So what if I take a English lord and I take him to the West? Because I thought that would be one way to kind of take my readers with me to the West.
Yeah. Well, and then you've already got conflict built in, because that's going to be conflict, right?
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
That's awesome. And what a great way to kind of not only pay tribute to your grandfathers, but also like bring them along and have them as a part of your writing. I know a lot of authors do that. All my kids are in a book. They each have their book that has their name in it. So it's kind of that way to pull it all together. That's really cool. All right. This was awesome. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm sure this will not be the last time.
Thanks for asking me. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So we'll figure something else out to talk about, because we always like to talk, don't we?
Yes, we do.
So anyway, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.